Carmen Bot, welcome to the Soccer Queens podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks for being here. And I want you to just give a background on who you are and what you're up to today and what kind of led you to what you're doing in this journey.
Okay. Well, that's, I guess, a big question. So I'll try to be succinct. I started my career as a personal trainer, doing sort of general fitness with clients when I was very young. I was about 19 and in university. And I quickly realized that working with more serious population would probably be better for my personality. So I volunteered to work at a college. So in the United States, it would be considered like a JUCO, but I'm in Canada and we just call it college. And so it's like a 2-year transfer type program. Worked with a basketball team. I was with the women's basketball team for a year at the college, and then when I transferred to continue my schooling at a university, I went to that university and worked in women's basketball at that university, and this was back in 1998. So at the time, there weren't really any strength and conditioning coaches, at least were in Canada, really working with teams like on a regular basis. So I was sort of one of the first people at the University of British Columbia working with athletes and with female athletes. So, the girls sort of got somebody working with them even before the men's team did, which is kind of unheard of nowadays. But that's where I got started. And I've always had a love of basketball and team sport. And from there, I started my own business. I got a job. I did a master's degree in sports medicine and physiology. I began teaching at the post-secondary level, and I taught at a junior college for 16 years. And then while I was coaching, and then after I sort of resigned from there, I started at a university called Simon Fraser University, which is our second biggest school in the province, and we're actually Canada's only NCAA school, which is kind of an interesting bit of trivia for the American audience. And so I still work with athletes of all different levels in sport, but I've taken a particular interest in rehab and in return to play. I went back to school in 2019 to do some more graduate work in sports psychology. And I find that the return to play puzzle isn't just physical. I mean, no performance puzzle is just physical, but the return to play piece is very mental as well. And so I do some mental skills training on top of the physical work that I do with clients to get them back, to competing at the level that they were at before, they got hurt. So that's what I'm doing now. And it's all kinds of different athletes. There's no one in particular sport that I specialize in by any means. So yeah.
Awesome. It sounds like just such a nice blend of practical experience as well as getting into academics and research and teaching as well. And I love that. Now I'm curious, what is your just overall performance coaching philosophy and some of the things that you focus on with your athletes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've actually thought a lot about this, and then when I built my website last summer with my 11-year-old, because he's better at stuff like that than me, I got to that point and I thought, what am I going to write, for philosophy? And I guess it's twofold. It's very holistic, so that brings in the mental piece as well as the physical. So that sort of mind body approach would be part of my philosophy, and then my other, a large part of my philosophy is that movement matters. So I am a huge advocate of ensuring correct technique on everything, whether it's being in the weight room, doing a squat, or doing a press, or being out on the pitch or on the field, doing a 45-degree step cut. That doing things well technically, I think, it's not a panacea. It doesn't solve every problem, but I do believe that it has a very big impact on performance. And it's, when you get athletes that are really consummate in their approach to developing themselves for their sport, like maybe it's a basketball player that is a shooting guard, they really buy into that too, because they understand, hey, if I don't line my body up properly and when I shoot, that I'm probably not going to score, that the ball's going to go off center. And so when you explain sort of how doing things properly in the weight room results in higher force output, more power, less aberrant stress on the body, they tend to buy into that. So I would say movement is a key cornerstone of what I like to do. And of course, there's always outliers, athletes that are extremely explosive and fast that don't necessarily move well. But I would almost bet that those same athletes are putting themselves more at risk when it comes to injuries. So yeah,
So, I hear the term a lot, neuromuscular training. What are your thoughts on this? Because couldn't we just say, well, it's just basic, it's just strength training?
yeah,
Like, I don't get
just
why.
training.
Yeah.
You know where that shows up, I find, is in the therapy literature. So if I grab an article that's written for an audience of a strength and conditioning coach, you don't see that term. If I grab an article on, let's say, ACL return to play training, which there's probably one good one out of like 700, um, they use that term on it, over and over and over. And if you break it in half, neuromuscular, that's the brain and the muscle. Well, hopefully, everything we're doing with athletes involves their brain and not just their muscle. So I agree with you. I think it's a really vague term and it's almost like a redundant thing to say. You could just say, like you said, strength training because you're actually chasing an adaptation, power training or rate of force development training. You're chasing that adaptation, endurance training. I also dislike the term work capacity, but that's another conversation.
Why is
Yeah.
that?
Again, it's just vague. So I'm reading an article this morning and it's talking about how in sort of how we need to screen people to return back to sports. So they need to have hamstring, calf, and glute work capacity. And I'm like, that's interesting. What does that mean? Of course, the article doesn't describe or define work capacity. It gives us a criteria of 25 repetitions for each body part. There's no difference between the glutes, the hamstrings, and the calves. It's all 25 reps. And there shouldn't be more than a 5% difference between the sides of the body. And I thought that's interesting because if somebody ran or sprinted, 10 yards, I would probably argue that they're doing, I don't know, 7 repetitions of hamstring contractions per side. And then if they did that over and over in a game, like a basketball player might cut and change direction like 156 times in a game and run, around that distance, they might actually do like 700 hamstring contractions in a game. So I don't know where they get 25. I don't know what work capacity means. To me, that's just local muscular endurance in a very specific area of the body, that's task specific as well. So, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head, Erica, with the fact that there's things that we read and things that people keep repeating and nobody's sort of going, well, what exactly are you talking about? When you say that neuromuscular or work capacity. So I just try to get to the meat of it, I suppose, and figure out like what I can actually impact, as a coach.
That's very true. There's just a lot of things that we've been doing in the performance world that no one's really thinking to question. And as far as the return to play protocols, I mean, I have seen just so many different ones. And I always wonder, okay, well, how are we like quantifying like that an athlete is ready to return to play? And what does their conditioning look like? What does the load increase look like? And I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like people are just winging it. Like, there's no,
100%.
like, objective data
Yeah.
for return
No,
to play, so I'm
there
curious what you do.
you're absolutely right. There is no objective return to play. There was an article I came across that suggested that an athlete needed to do a single leg press to 90 degrees of knee flexion at 2 times body weight before they should jump. Because vertical jumping on 2 feet, it has a load, like a mechanical load index of around 1.5 times body weight, but that's off 2 feet. And so the article suggested leg pressing 1.5 times body weight on one leg. I actually thought, I don't really know of very many athletes that can do that, regardless if they've ever had an ACL surgery or, a patellar tendon rupture or something like super catastrophic at the knee. And I worked with Canada Wrestling. And when I left Canada, I worked with some of the Americans before the like 2018, 2019 World Championships and into the 2021 Olympics. And I have girls that can front squat, 60-kilo girls that are front squatting 225 pounds. Like these are very strong athletes, some of the strongest female athletes I have ever worked with. And I know that they can't even leg press on one leg, 1.5 times their body weight. Like I'm not really sure where these standards do come from sometimes. I think there's just a disconnect and a lack of conversation between the strength coach, the sport coach, the physical therapist, and the medical doctor or the surgeon. Like I just don't think they're all in the same room talking enough or watching each other, work and offering solutions together, as a cohesive unit. It just sort of seems like a game of telephone, right? Where by the time you get to the end of the line, whatever was initially said is like not even close to that. And you probably have a few people along the way that messed with the story anyways. So yeah.
Oh, for sure. And I've seen some really wacky things with return to play on the conditioning front because,
Okay.
like you said, the physical therapist is not talking to the team coach enough. And that player could have run like 2 miles in practice that night, but the physical therapist only has them at another distance in the rehab program. So it's a complete mess as far as the load monitoring is concerned. So, are you doing anything as far as like the conditioning for return to play?
Oh yeah. It depends obviously on the stage that they're at. Um, and I am a bit unconventional. So with respect to conditioning, I know that cycling, like bicycle riding, is very common in like more of a clinical physiotherapy, physical therapist type approach. But as soon as I have an athlete that can hinge bilaterally with even pressure on both feet, um, they're doing kettlebell swings. So I actually have a protocol that I use. It starts at about, it depends on the individual. So I don't like to say weeks. I prefer to say stages or phases, but sort of anywhere between 3 and 4 months post op from a traumatic knee surgery are doing very high volume kettlebell swings in like an interval training program. It's low impact. You get a lot of hamstring work and you're not loading the knee, and then we can use just basic patellar knee, like knee effusion, circumference, to monitor daily. So in the morning and at night, just to monitor swelling, after that type of training. So I do that. I also use a retrograde treadmill or hill if the person has access to a hill outside that's not slippery. Doing a lot of retrograde means backwards walking on the hill to build the quads and to work through fuller ranges of motion through the ankle joint, as opposed to just sort of sticking with the status quo of riding the bike. So I do those interventions quite early on. And then when athletes are strong enough to handle sort of the dribble series that Dan Pfaff teaches at Altus, I have them do really high volumes of dribble series, like miserable amounts actually, leading up with medicine ball overhead. If you can do your dribbles, your gear ones and your gear twos with a medicine ball overhead for repeated 15-yard intervals, then they've now built some capacity to handle jogging, and then we would segue into jogging. So when I think about conditioning, I have them doing conditioning almost right from sort of the get-go, right from the beginning. I had one athlete, this is kind of a hilarious story. Poor guy, he gets his ACL repaired right around Christmas time. It's it's depressing. The weather's not great." He's like, "Is there anything I can do to get my heart rate up?" And I said, "Yes. I'm gonna give you a protocol that's absolutely ridiculous. You're gonna hate me for it, but you're gonna get your heart rate up." And so literally what I had him do, what, because he was still in crutches at this point, like he was literally maybe 5 days post-op. Sit on the ground, sit on the floor, and then stand up on your non-operative leg. Sit back down on the floor, stand up on your non-operative leg. Do a minute, rest a minute, do 5 rounds. Next day, do 8 rounds. Next day, do 12 rounds. And he basically did that for about, a week until he could start to waver a little bit on that leg. But and then I suggested, you could even try, coming getting up from different positions. Use your upper body, almost like doing a single leg push up, and then stand up. So we just called those get up, get downs. I've used them with athletes that have sprained ankles. If they're, we're in a group setting and they want to feel included. Because sometimes, coaches will have an athlete just go off to the side and ride the bike, right? You're going to attend practice, but you're not really at practice. You're just off in the corner riding the bike. And they don't feel like they can be part of something. But if the athletes are doing some kind of a conditioning session, you can modify things and have athletes do things on one leg if they need to. And I think that we just sometimes get so paranoid about following some kind of recipe that we lose our ability to be creative as coaches, and we forget that these are people that want to be included. They don't want to feel fragile. They don't want to feel left out, and we need to be better at coming up with solutions that maybe not conventional, maybe a bit silly, that at least give them a training stimulus. Have them sit on a chair or a stability ball and hit focus pads with boxing gloves on. There's a lot of things that we can do with kids or with athletes that are injured and healing that doesn't involve just riding the bike, right? So,
That's
yeah.
brilliant. I love that drill, getting up on your non-operative leg as much as you can, and I just was having flashbacks to when I learned snowboarding for the first time, and you're
Okay.
constantly, like, falling down and getting up, falling down and getting up, and man, your heart rate is, like, through the roof, and
It's
that's
brutal.
conditioning in
Yeah.
itself. So, yeah, guys, it's really tough to do that, especially on one leg.
It's very tough. Actually, that's why I suggested done as intervals. It's not something that you can
Mhm.
do, for 10 minutes continuous. It's like a minute on and then take a rest. Yeah.
No, I wanna shift gears a little bit to your philosophy on speed development because I
Mhm.
saw one of your tweets, and this is what, propelled me to message you, but you said something along the lines of, speed development shouldn't be so robotic to the point that our athletes forget how to innately move. It was something like that, and I was, like, leaning in, like, "Oh, that's really interesting," but I really like that because sometimes I feel we tend to get so caught up in, like, mechanics, 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 perfect
Mhm.
mechanics. So, just kind of go in depth on your speed philosophy.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll borrow from one of my mentors to start with. He's a level 4 track coach, phys ed teacher. He's a strength and conditioning coach in Canada. He's great. His name's Glenn Bruce, and he used to tell me, everyone has a movement signature. So although part of my philosophy is having sound movement capability, it's not a bullseye. It's sort of a general construct, if you will. And there's things that we want to look for when we're coaching speed with individuals that would be closer to ideal. And then there are things that we can sort of, I guess, I don't want to say forget about, but we don't necessarily need to harp on so much. And they might be a bit more part of somebody's movement signature. So, what I tend to do, because I tend to coach speed to non-track athletes, first, like right out of the gates, these individuals are going to sprint differently than a linear speed track and field athlete, a 100-meter sprinter. So that model, I think, although a nice model to have as an ideal. It's almost like it's on a shelf that we can't quite reach. Okay, there's a few athletes. I have one guy that I work with. He looks very similar to a 100-meter sprinter when he runs. He's got very, very long femurs, long shanks, very short torso. He's very strong. Um, like his strength to weight ratio is very, very good. So he's not very heavy for how strong he is. Yeah, he sprints very, very well. But that's not everybody. So my philosophy is to certainly clean up mechanical issues that would potentially lead to like a hamstring issues or hip flexor issues. So, making sure that the general shapes and acceleration are sound. I don't know if you want me to go into what those, would look like, but and then looking at, backside mechanics is key. I find with females, there tends to be a lot more excessive backside mechanics. Like, and there's nothing wrong with an anterior pelvic tilt. It's when the pelvis tilts and the legs start going, almost look like they're going around in a circle as opposed to a piston like action. That's a strength issue as far as I'm concerned. So I get them on the wall doing wall drills and get them doing specific drills that involve lower body strength, like lunging and things of that nature. But yeah, my general philosophy towards sprinting is that that technical model of the sprinter is slightly out of reach, but there are aspects of that model that are useful. Do you have any other questions, Erica, that would, maybe help your readers understand this a bit more? I feel like I'm maybe talking in circles.
Yeah, I guess if you want to go over what you're looking for in acceleration and then get more into the backside mechanics, kind of give like a visual of like what we should be aiming for.
Okay. So in acceleration, the what I tend to start people with that are maybe more novice is things like push-up starts. As opposed to getting them starting in like a track, like a 3-point or a 4-point position. Most athletes just don't have the strength, especially younger athletes, physically less mature athletes, to get into a good 45-degree, sort of trunk angle. So, in order to teach the brain not to be fearful of those positions, I sort of work backwards and get them on the floor. And it's not so much where I have them do a push up, knee in, and then go. It's very methodical. It's get in onto the ground, go into your push up, hold that position for half a count, bring one knee in, and then explain to them how they're driving the floor away. So pushing behind them, using some of the kind of common cues that coaches use. And then I think the other key is that nobody talks about is the need for practicing this over a long period of time. And that a lot of times, I think coaches think, oh, well, if I just teach them and show them the positions that they need to be in, that they're going to just do those things. But we forget that they actually have to get strong in those positions, and being really strong has as much to do with putting on muscle as it has to do with the nervous system allowing that movement. So again, back to specific angles, if an individual isn't very strong, their body will want to go upright immediately because they just don't have the strength and capacity of strength to handle those forces. So just kind of honoring that and knowing that a novice is not necessarily going to be able to hit those angles until they keep training and to keep training them. And it's not like it's not like a computer program that you're writing. And if you write the wrong code, you've now like erased the old program. Everything is progress. It's 2 steps forward, one step back. It's somewhat nonlinear. Learning is somewhat nonlinear. And I always find too that learning kind of also can skip. So what I mean by that is an individual will not be able to do something very well and then all of a sudden be able to do something very, very well. And, that's part of the motor behavior piece. So, I'm looking for in acceleration, I'm looking for a 45-degree body lean, and I'm looking for the front shin angle to be as acute as possible. But those can only happen with strength, not just practice. How do we get stronger? We practice. So it's like this weird iterative circle. The backside mechanics piece, what I don't excessively try to coach backside mechanics. I find that if I work on upright mechanics in the dribble series, in marching drills, and in skipping drills, that the athlete tends to learn that they need to place force into the ground and place their foot underneath their hip or slightly ahead of their hip. So I'm just big on posture, and anytime you can have an athlete hold an implement above their head, keep their body in, sort of lined up, that helps with that piston leg action, and it helps with strengthening the hip on that one side. I don't get overly preoccupied with a million different drills. So I'll usually choose about 3 to 4 drills in a workout and just do a lot of volume of those particular drills. So marching drills, dribbling drills, drills where the athlete is doing maybe some A running with an implement overhead, and that would be it. And I really and then if I progress someone, it's just getting into more sport specific starting positions for acceleration. From the push up start, you might have a softball player that starts from a lateral position, goes into a crossover step into an acceleration. You might have a basketball player that goes into a 2-point start and into acceleration, and then eventually goes into a deceleration into a re acceleration. I think that the arms are undercoached on acceleration. I often cue just extremely violent arms action. With boys, they like that cue. Girls kind of look at me funny, like, what do you mean by violent? So, just have to kind of show that they have to be very expressive with their arm action and not to smell their way to the finish line, which means not to protrude and lead with the face, to lead with the belt buckle or the hip as well. And that I find that when an athlete leads with their nose, and like I said, I say smelling your way to the end, then that tends to create the backside mechanics that we don't want. So they get almost like disconnected. Their torso almost becomes ahead of their hip and their lower body. So in order to keep everything in a nice tight spring to drive into the ground, arms are leading the legs in terms of very, very deliberate movement, and then leading the hips lead the way. So that's sort of my general nutshell, and I would say I use those cues to coach 13-year-olds all the way up to guys that play professional American football up here. So it's, just the basics over and over and over again. I think that a lot of coaches just need to be told that their job is to be a professional reminder. And when people coach me, I always appreciate the reminders. I don't mind learning the same things it's not a failure to be reminded of the same things all the time. I think that's totally normal. But a lot of times I think coaches just feel this like pressure to come up with something new or to be, I don't know, to be more innovative. And they don't have to be.
Yeah, everyone's trying to reinvent the wheel when it's really just the basics and being consistent with it. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate that. And I know this is a glimpse of what you do, but you do offer some educational courses for some more in-depth education. So what do you have that you want to plug to the coaches listening?
Oh, sure. Well, I have a couple things. I have a membership portal on my website so people can join and become a member, and there are a whole whack of tutorial videos and crib sheets, I call them. So sort of like cheat sheets. So like a coach's checklist for a change of direction. There's a return to run 8-week program. There's a modified Prilipin chart for strength training and exactly the number of reps for this much volume, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one offering that I created because so many people were asking me for more content, and it's really hard to do long form content on social media. Twitter's a bit of a nightmare. Um, you can't, if I post a video on Twitter, nobody really watches it. It's because it's like, well, what is this? How does this relate to other things? In my membership portal, there's like 6 videos just in change of direction, for example, and they're short, and there are, I think the longest one is 14 minutes. They come with downloadable notes packages, so nobody even has to really take many notes. You can sort of sit back, watch the video, implement the stuff with your clients right away. And because I'm a teacher by trade, I think I've kind of got a few things figured out about how people learn and how people learn best. And then the other offering I have is a course. I do offer a 8-week course, and it actually starts next week. It's full for the fall cohort, but I'll be offering it again in the new year. And it's actually an ACL return to play exercise prescription from A to Z course. And I came up with this course because there is really no information in the literature to guide strength coaches, kinesiologists, even physical therapists on how to get someone back to the highest level of not the highest level of sport in terms of, like being a professional athlete. I'm talking more in like the most demanding sports on the ACL, which would be your cutting, change of direction, deceleration, contact sports like soccer, like basketball, like field hockey and lacrosse and American football, etc. So, and those are the sports that I tend to have the most knowledge in. And I've been really lucky, Erica. When I was with UBC basketball for 7 years, we had no ACLs. Like, and back then I was so young. I was 22 years old when I started with the program, and we won 2 national championships. We were very good and we were very injury free. But now moving, I had almost 20 years, and looking back, I went, geez, maybe I was doing something really right back then. I haven't changed much since, but I've always been a huge proponent of plyometrics. And but that is the plyometric piece is key. But you open up the ACL rehab literature and it says, okay, now you're going to go from leg press to a drop jump. I'm like, you got to be effing kidding me. Like, no strength coach, you're smiling because you know that we wouldn't freaking do that. Like, honestly, get your heads out of your butts, people. Like, this is embarrassing. So, sorry to be a bit crass here, but I get emotional about it because these are young athletes that are being affected in they're being underserviced. So rather than me complaining about it on Twitter, I've decided to build this course. And I went, okay, screw this. I'm just going to build a course and I'll teach anyone who's willing to listen how to do this. Can I guarantee an athlete will never re-tear an ACL? No. But there are modifiable risk factors, which you've written about in your book, that we can address. And so one of them is strength. Another one is control, landing ability, rate of force development. We can control all of those things. And so a sound plyometric program, but understanding where to start with plyometrics, and that a drop jump is like way down the continuum of load, of mechanical load. I'm like, holy shit. Why not start with pogos and then maybe move to some bounding? And then, hey, guess what? Did you know hopping is actually way harder on the body than bounding? You know that. I know that because we've tried the drills. But if you haven't done the drills, and part of the homework in my course is these people taking it are going to have to try the drills. Here's a program. Go do this workout. Try the workout. It doesn't matter if you're not good at the drills. I'm old now. I'm terrible at some of these drills. I have to use my athletes in videos, but it's good to experience them because then you really know, oh my gosh, this stuff is like really hard. And yeah, if the athlete can't do that and they can't control their landing on one leg, how can we expect them to cut, change direction, evade an opponent, and do that in a fatigue state in a game or many games, right? So, yeah, that's my kind of rant, I suppose. Sorry for ranting, but yeah, I know that you share the same passion about this area.
100%. And I totally agree that a lot of these athletes are being totally underserviced, especially in rehab and return to play. And even though I'm not in the physical therapy world, I would love to take your course just to learn. And I really like that idea of everyone trying the movements because if you had them do, okay, we're going to go from a leg press to a drop jump, then they're going to realize, okay, this doesn't make any sense. There's no progression. It's just 0 to 100. So I think that's like cool that they can see that progression in intensity along the way and then that specificity in the last portion of the rehab program. But I encourage everyone to get Carmen's course and check out her website. I'm going to include all of the links below in the caption. And would you say, Carmen, you are most responsive on Twitter or through your website?
I'd say actually Instagram. I
Oh,
tend to use
Instagram. Okay.
Instagram a lot more, yeah, than
Okay.
Twitter. But I am responsive on both. And in the membership portal, we also I hold a focus group meeting every month. So people that are part of my membership we just do like call, we all talk on Zoom and people have questions, it's all included in the membership. So that's another option if people want something a little bit more tailored. But yeah, they can DM me on Instagram. That's no problem.
Okay,
Mhm.
great. So I will also include that in the caption below. So please, everyone, check out Carmen's amazing work. We hope you learned a lot from this episode, but of course, there is more to dive into with all of her amazing resources. I will see everyone on next week's episode. And Carmen, thank you again.